Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Cess, your moderator from Business Review, and it's truly a pleasure to have you all here. We're delighted to have our wonderful sponsor, Donaldson, with us today, who will be presenting this webinar titled Food Safety, Best Practices for Sterile Compressed Air Filtration in the Food and Beverage Industry. Let me introduce our esteemed guest speakers for today. Our first speaker, Catherine Machete, Global Manager of Business Development, Alcoholic Beverages at Donaldson. Catherine has over 15 years of experience in process filtration in the food and beverage market. Her previous role in technical sales and consulting spanned all aspects, with heavy focus on liquid process applications. She joined Donaldson in 2022 and is responsible for the global management of business development in the alcoholic beverage sector, where she oversees a team of subject matter experts in wine, brewing, and spirits. And our second speaker, Julia McLean, Northern Brewery Business Development Manager at Donaldson. Before joining Donaldson in 2022, Julia accumulated experience in engineering and most recently served as a brewer in multiple U.S. craft breweries. Leveraging her technical expertise and insights gained within the brewing market, she now excels in her role as a business development specialist within the alcoholic beverage sector. Julia also holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Now, before we begin and continue with the content, let me take a moment to familiarize you with our webinar platform on 24. This webinar is browser-based, so if you happen to disconnect for any reason, simply click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. Additionally, today's webinar will be recorded and available on demand access. We'll also have a few polls throughout the webinar, and your participation is greatly appreciated. Should you have any questions or thoughts during the presentation, simply click on the questions widget. Just type your questions into the box located at the top right-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We'll set aside some time at the end of this session to address your queries. For any technical assistance, the yellow help widget is at your service, and you can adjust, resize, and maximize any of the windows on your screen for a better view of the slides. Now, without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to our first guest speaker, Julia.
Thank you, Sis. All right, first let's get into the agenda. So today's presentation will focus on the crucial role of compressed air in the food and beverage industry. We'll start by discussing some of the regulatory standards for compressed air in the industry, which ensure consumer safety and compliance across all facilities. Next, we will delve into the various industrial air filtration media options and the importance of building a compliant air system. Following that, we will explore the significance of sterile air elements and identifying the critical control points in your process to guarantee safe compressed air for consumers. Lastly, we will discuss best practices for maintaining the integrity of the airline and regular point of use testing. So before all that, we will start with a poll question to get to know our audience a little more.
Thank you, Julia. All right, everyone, before we continue with the presentation, we're going to take a quick poll to see what you think about GMPs. You should see the poll on your screen now. Take a moment to submit your response, and we'll review the results in a bit. The question is, how familiar are you with good manufacturing practices for compressed air in the F&B industry? Are you very familiar, somewhat, bit neutral, or are you a little less familiar? Are you somewhat unfamiliar, or is everything new? We'd like to know. And yep, we'll see those results in a moment. I can see the responses coming in, and it looks like we've got a good mix of opinions here. I'll give you a bit more time for those who have just joined us, and we'll look at the results together shortly. Okay, and here we go. Wow, interesting. Seems that a lot of people here, a majority, are somewhat familiar, so that's good to hear. Thank you all for your input. And yeah, let's delve into this topic a bit more. I'd like to pass it back to Julia.
All right, thanks everyone. Hopefully, no matter how familiar you are, you will still learn something new today. All right, first off, we're going to get into what some of the regulatory standards in place are for the food industry, as well as why they exist and how they came to be. Before we get started, we want to remind you that this presentation is intended as an overview of some of the regulatory standards applicable for compressed air in certain regions. As there are many regulations globally, there may be additional or different regulations or standards that may apply to your specific process. So please contact your local authorities having jurisdiction for more information specific to your region. All right, so regulatory standards for compressed air that comes into both indirect and direct contact with food and beverages have only been explicitly outlined since the International Organization of Standardization, or ISO, implemented 8573 in 1991. Since then, several governing bodies have developed standards such as IFS, FDA, SQF, just to name a few, that specify the filtration needed to stay compliant with these regulations. Clean, dry air, regular testing, and point of use needs to be at a certain level of filtration. So while some are more specific than others, as you can see from this table, by following the GMPs outlined here, you'll ensure that your facility is compliant with even the tightest regulations. Clean, dry air ensures not only less downtime due to system leaks or the need for equipment maintenance, which in turn keeps production running smoothly, but also mitigates the risk of contamination of products that may result in illnesses or recalls. All right, the IFS food standards focus on food safety and quality management systems that are designed to help companies comply with legal requirements and customer expectations. They cover areas such as food safety, traceability, and product labeling. These standards were developed by the German Retail Federation in collaboration with retailers and industry experts. Standard for, got into the next slide there. All right, so the FDA food standard, while the FDA does not have specific regulations for compressed air in the food industry, food manufacturers are responsible for ensuring the safety and quality of all components of their production process, including their compressed air. By following good manufacturing practices and implementing proper maintenance procedures, food manufacturers can help prevent contamination and ensure the safety of their products. The FDA Food Safety Modernization Act was enacted in the US in 2011 with the aim to prevent foodborne illnesses and improve food safety by shifting the focus of the industry from responding to contamination incidents to preventing them before they happen. So one of the main components of the FSMA is the establishment of preventative controls for both human and animal food production. This requires facilities to implement a risk-based food safety management scheme to identify and address potential hazards in their production processes. These preventative controls must include hazard analysis, monitoring procedures, corrective actions, verification actions, and record keeping. Compressed air points of use are considered critical control points if there is direct contact with the product. Other common areas for critical control points to look out for are in the utility room and just before packaging. The Safe Quality Food Program is similar to the FSMA food standard in the way that it is designed to help food manufacturers and suppliers implement and maintain a food safety management system that meets international standards. There is a large emphasis on risk-based preventative control and continuous improvement, as well as comprehensive requirements for food safety, quality, and regulatory compliance. The SQF guidance document released in 2014 helps walk manufacturers and suppliers through the process of achieving certification. One key element of this guidance document is the specification that the final stage of compressed air should remove 0.01 micron particles with 99.999% efficiency. Next up, the British Compressed Air Society, or BCAS, represents manufacturers, distributors, and users of compressed air in the UK. Together with the British Retail Consortium, they developed in the UK Code of Practice for Food Grade Air in 2006, which focuses on three main areas: contact, non-contact, high risk, and non-contact, low risk. The first two are held to the same standards shown, while the latter is set as its own category so that the facility's plant air is not held to such a stringent standard. The BCAS also publishes statistical information about the state of compressed air equipment in the UK. Now I'll hand it back to Cess for another poll question before getting into the next topic.
Thank you, Julia. All right, folks, let's take another quick poll. This time we want to know your thoughts on GMP protocols. Your responses will help guide the next part of our discussion and live QA later in the webinar. All right, and it should be all on your screens now. The question this time is, how frequently does your facility review and update its GMP protocols for compressed air systems? Annually for A, B every couple of years, C every 5 years, D only when there are regulatory changes, and E, we do not have a regular review. Okay, remember there are no right or wrong answers here, and we're interested in your perspective and experiences. And again, your input helps create a richer discussion for everyone. I'll give everyone a few more seconds. I know this might be a bit of a tricky question, and then we'll move on. Okay, moving on to the results. Thank you all for participating. Let's see what everyone thinks. Great. Well, this has a surprising results, and it's always enlightening to see a diverse perspective. Now, with these insights in mind, I'll turn it back to Catherine to provide more context for the next topic.
All right, now that we understand what standards are in place and what regulations to follow, we can get into how to achieve those standards in your facility. And this is just a reminder that as questions come up during the presentation, feel free to keep putting them in there so we can address them at the end. So we'll start with the industrial side of compressed air, which is classified by the ISO 8573-1 standard. Ambient air in the facility contains contaminants in the form of dirt, moisture, and oil, and all can cause issues downstream, especially when the vapor condenses at various points across the system. As a sterile filter at your point of use is not designed to remove various particulate, only microorganisms, it's really important that they're removed upstream. Compressed air is considered a utility and can often be overlooked when a facility is developing their hazard analyses. The ISO 8573-1 sorts compressed air quality into different classes based on the maximum allowable concentrations of particles, which is in column A, water, which is in column B, and oil in column C, present in the air. And using the table, you can determine what equipment you need in place to achieve the necessary air quality for your specific application. For example, the BCAS standard is 121 for both direct and indirect food contact, where non-food contact compressed air has a more relaxed 242. So the lower the numbers, the tighter the spec is going to be. And Class 0 requires defined specs outlined by either the user or the supplier and is more stringent than Class 1, but there has to be some definition in place to comply with that. Depending on the parameters of your current system, you'll select the filters you need to help you achieve the chosen ISO class depending on the following factors. What kind of compressor you're using? Is it oil-free? What type of dryer? For example, the highest class, the refrigeration dryer, can produce is 4. So an absorption dryer would be needed downstream for any critical control points. If you're looking at plant air or tools, refrigeration dryer is fine. And then are there any filtration steps upstream of your critical points of use? And performance data of the filters themselves are compared against another ISO standard, 12500, which ensures it's validated and will filter air in compliance with the class that you select, that you need to be able to fit. The housing combination that's best for your facility and the filter combination best for your facility will depend on where they're installed, but to meet or exceed the standards that Julia just outlined, SQF, GFSI, CFR Title 21, you'll have to have a particulate filter, a coalescing filter, which removes oil and oil aerosols, as well as any solid particulate, and an active carbon stage, which removes oil vapor, hydrocarbons, and any odors from compressed air. Sometimes these stages can be combined, but it's important to look for that ISO 12500 standard to know that it's validated for what you need it to do. If the line is going to be steamed in place for sanitization, the housings will have to be stainless steel, and the filter elements may change, but their function and the order of install will remain the same. In addition to providing the required pre-filtration for sterile air, the production of clean, dry air keeps falling of equipment to a minimum, which makes sure the facility keeps running smoothly in efficiency, so you avoid downtime and added maintenance cost. And again, important parameters include oil and moisture content, as well as any filtration upstream. These factors will determine which filters are needed to remain compliant further down the line. The filtration discussed in the previous slide will be coming directly off the compressor or storage tank, or in line both upstream and downstream of the dryer. That depends on the installation location and class required. For instance, if you've got point of use that's going to be outside, you would have your absorption dryer inside, and then other things in between that and the point of use that can handle any temperature swings. If we move into the sterile side, the final point of use filter will be in a sanitary stainless steel housing. This is an example. It shows a setup or an installation of an air filtration system. The type of dryer chosen will depend on the quality of the air that you'd like to achieve, as we talked about. A refrigerant dryer might be a more economical choice, but can only lower the dew point to around 3 to 5 degrees C or up to class 4. Again, sufficient for most industrial and plant air applications or tools. In instances where the more critical classes of clean, dry air or sterile air are needed, an absorption dryer is necessary to hit that negative 40 dew point. As class 121 air is seldom required throughout your entire facility, the absorption dryer and subsequent sterile air filtration can be sized and installed closer to point of use. This point brings us to the next poll question regarding use. Seth?
Thank you, Catherine. All right, everyone, time for another poll. This one is about primary application. Again, your feedback is crucial, so please take a moment to share your thoughts. The question for this poll is, what is the primary application of compressed air in your facility? We've got a few little options there for you to pick from. We've got A, packaging, B, processing, C for cleaning, D for conveying materials, and E, other. Please specify in the Q&A box. Love to hear and see the results in a moment. And as you're submitting your responses, feel free to use the Q&A widget to share any additional thoughts or questions you have on this topic or the topic that we've just discovered or just went through. Again, we love hearing your thoughts, and we'll be addressing those questions later on in the webinar. Okay, I'm going to give a few more seconds for those that like to have a good think before choosing their answer. And all right, so moving on. Thank you all for your responses. Let's quickly review the results. Okay, great. So we see a majority is processing. Great. Thank you all for participating. This gives us a lot of to think about, and I'll pass it back to Julia to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Sis. All right, now we will get into sterile air and gas and the importance of critical control points and point of use filtration. All right, after going through industrial grade pre-filtration, as Catherine just talked about, air is ready for final filtration before it comes into contact with the product or product contact surface. Point of use filtration is very important since the previous filtration is not designed to remove bacteria at an absolute retention rate, and we want it specifically at the point of use so that it doesn't have the opportunity to encounter any pipe scale or contaminants after going through the sterile filter. All right, contaminants can be introduced into the process from many different sources. Airborne particles such as dust and dirt can enter the system from ambient air. Oil and lubricants can come from the compressor itself or other fluids used in production. And of course, the personnel and operators can bring contaminants from outside the production area if the proper precautions aren't taken. Microbiological contamination is the most critical, which is what we are removing with sterile filtration. Other important steps to remove these microbiological contaminants are proper clean in place and steam in place procedures. All right, so now how clean does this clean dry air have to be? So this depends on where it's installed and what it will be used for. Looking at the right side of this process map now, we see that specific applications require different levels of compressed air. So for example, the highest quality 111 used for things like process air and measurement technologies. This allows 100 particles between 0.1 and 0.5 microns per cubic meter, and only one particle between 0.5 and 1 micron per cubic meter. So for reference, the human eye can see things as small as 40 to 50 microns. So this class of air also requires a dew point equal or less than minus 70 degrees Celsius and less than 0.01 milligrams per cubic meter of oil vapor. So the type of product that you're producing, whether it's wet or dry, for example, has a lot to do with the quality of air that is necessary. So it's important to ensure your point of use air is up to code based on your specific product and regional area, and that you have a maintenance plan in place in order to not fall out of compliance. So next, Catherine is going to talk to you about how periodic line audits can help you maintain integrity and why it's beneficial for you to do so. But first, Cess will introduce one last poll question for the audience.
Thanks, Julia. Hello, everyone. We're coming up to our final poll for today. Again, we'd love to hear your thoughts on filtration. Your feedback is invaluable as we wrap up the polls for the webinar. All right, so the question for the last poll is, what is your concern regarding the filtration of compressed air in your facility? There's quite a few different answers here, so please pick the one that is most related to you. So we have A, ensuring compliance with food safety standards. B, maintaining consistent air quality. C, reducing maintenance costs. D, extending the lifespan of equipment. E, improving overall production efficiency. And F, other. And if you're just joining us, welcome. We're currently running a poll and getting everyone's thoughts on filtration concerns. Now, I can see the majority has inputted their answer, so let's take a look at the final poll results. And here they are. You should see them on your screen. Very interesting. And this is a great note to end on, and it gives us a clear picture of your thoughts and experiences. And with this final insight, I'd like to pass it back to Catherine one last time.
Right, given that most people are concerned about keeping with compliance, something that we can offer, or that it's important to look for maybe in a partner when you're looking at your compressed air system and how to stay in compliance, are kind of what their services are. So capabilities of any field service teams to look at your line integrity, and what that means not only for cost savings in terms of efficiency and the way that the plant is running, but also keeping in line with all the different standards for on-site filter integrity testing, documented results, periodic line audits. You can determine areas of any potential concern along that line. If the line expands or you're adding different points of use, then having an eye or sometimes like fresh eyes over the line can really help you see anything that you might want to take care of. It could also help identify where losses can occur, such as condensate drains, and offer solutions that not only cut air loss during discharge, but also assist with more effective and environmentally sound condensate management. Aside from the regulatory compliance, another factor to consider in your compressed air system is the operational efficiency. As a utility, one of the most important parameters is the differential pressure generated across the compressed air treatment. And higher differential pressure translates to a higher load for the compressor and thus higher energy costs. On average, for every 1 bar of differential pressure, there is about a 10% increase in energy cost. This is important to bear in mind when you're sizing your system as well. The various components are designed for certain flows to keep the strain and pressure differential as low as possible, and therefore as efficient as possible. And to this end, the field service team can help determine an efficient preventative maintenance schedule for your facility, which takes into account energy use, system demands, and filter cost. Any air quality assessments include bacterial counts and quality measurements, such as residual oil and particle content, volume flow, and working pressure, as well as flow velocity within the system. This will conclude the lecture part of the webinar. If you'd like more in-depth information about anything we've touched on, this was general best practices, you can scan the QR code on the top left for additional resources. And if you'd like to speak with us about improving efficiencies or figuring out what your compliance needs to be, auditing your lines, discussing new installations, anything like that, you can please get in touch with us via the QR code on the bottom right. We're happy to go more in depth on any and all of these. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We do have time for questions, so we can get to those now.
Yep, thank you, Catherine and Julia, for your informative presentations. Now let's dive into our live Q&A session. As a quick reminder to our audience, to ask questions, simply use the questions widget. Just type them into the box located at the top right-hand corner of your screen and click submit. Okay, so I can see a lot of great questions coming in, and some that have already been inputted during the webinar. So fantastic. Let's kick things off with this first question. Is it normal for my sterile filters to be changed out every month?
I can touch on that one. So that is a bit more frequent than we would usually recommend. So if you're having to change out your sterile point of use filters this often, there is a good chance that you might not have enough pre-filtration in place. So whether you're changing the filters out to increase pressure drop in the system or failed integrity tests, it's probably a good idea to look at the filtration process before that point of use sterile filter to make sure that it's not having to work too hard, and then you won't have to replace it as often. And then, maybe your less expensive filters before that are working a little harder to protect that sterile filter.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you for that great question and answer. So we've got another interesting question from the attendees. And it's a bit of a two-parter, so I'll ask it slowly. What's the best way to find leaks in my system? And how do I calculate how much I can save by doing this?
Okay, I can take that one. Finding leaks can actually be pretty easy and pretty inexpensive, and it can save you a lot of time and energy in the long run. If possible, even like listening or feeling for leaks while the system's not running. You can spray soapy water where you think there might be a potential for leaks, look for bubbles there. That's kind of a quick and dirty way to do it. To be a bit more thorough, you can use an ultrasonic detection. You can, ask service team to come in, help you look for leaks. Figuring out how much you can save, though, can be a little bit tougher to calculate unless you can really identify the exact size of the leak. But for example, say if you had like an eighth of an inch leak or maybe 3 millimeters square on a 100 psi system, that can be a loss of up to around $1,200 a year. So it is important to make sure that you're doing periodic looks for these.
Thank you, Catherine, for that. And yep, thank you for your answer. Moving on to the next question. Do I still need a coalescing filter if I have an oil-free compressor?
I can take that one.
Yeah.
I would say yes. An oil-free compressor doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be no oil in your system. So it doesn't use oil as a lubricant, but it doesn't totally eliminate any oil coming in from the ambient air. So there's still a risk of that contaminating other parts of your process. So since there are standards in place specifically for oil vapors and the amount that can be in your compressed air, it's definitely best to have that coalescing filter to ensure that you are compliant at all times. And if you don't have, or if you do have an oil-free compressor, then it probably will just, you'll have to replace that coalescing filter less often. So that's good for you.
Thank you very much. And again, I just want to remind the attendees you still can ask our speakers questions using the questions widget. All right, on to the next question. Okay, so I can see this interesting one about dryers. So if I plan on expanding my facility in the future, can I just install a bigger dryer now?
Good question and very fair. It's always good to plan ahead, but regardless of the type that you're looking at for your system, they're meant to really operate at capacity. So it should be sized to accommodate the worst case conditions, like any spikes on the system or higher flows or bad ambient air quality, but it shouldn't really be significantly oversized. Oversizing like a refrigerated dryer can put stress on it, which leads to really high maintenance costs. And then CapEx and maintenance costs will go up if you oversize your absorption dryer. So it really can become a case of diminishing returns. It's really going to depend on how much you're looking to oversize it.
Thank you, Catherine, for that. So we've got more interesting questions from the attendees. Is the air filtration system effective in eliminating the microorganisms from the bottle?
If we're talking about sterile air filtration for like PET bottles, like blow molding, yes. And also if you're purging any liquid filled bottles with sterile air, assuming that you've kind of rinsed them upstream. So I would need maybe a little bit more detail to give you something more in depth, but the short answer is, assuming that you're looking at the PET blow molding, yes.
Thank you. That was a great question and great answer from Catherine. Another question about similar topic is this: does all air contacting the product need to be defined as sterile?
Yes.
Mhm.
Is the short answer on that one. Anything that comes into direct contact with the product, and even direct contact, absolutely. Indirect contact, also, yes.
Thank you. That was a nice short answer and straight to the point. And lastly, can you please recap what the FDA requires for air standards for food application?
Do you want to jump in that one, Julia? Go back to the slide.
Yes.
There we go.
So we can go back to, yes. So they don't necessarily have specific regulations for compressed air in the food industry. If we want to go to the next slide, this is an FDA governed, so the FSMA food standards. So it's going to depend on what your product is. It's probably, if it's food contact, it's probably 121 or 111 quality air that you're going to need. So if we want to go to where that table is, that's on this slide right here.
Yep.
So you can kind of see what that means when I'm saying 121 or 111. So it's going to be, that first one is the particle size. That second one is referring to the dew point, and then that third is referring to the total oil allowed in the air.
Yeah, the FDA is a little bit tricky because with the Food Safety Modernization Act, you're required to have these HACCP plans and these plans in place, but unless it's like a dairy, like a 3A standard, or you're like kind of conforming to another set of standards that outline specifics, it's just really expected that you have some sort of audit plan in place. And that's something, depending on the product and the use, we can kind of help you with determine to make sure that you are following all of these best practices.
Great. Well, that was a fantastic question, and thank you both for your answer. And yeah, so I'll ask this final question before we close our live Q&A session. Does a lone sterile filtration system is effective in removing microbial contamination, or it has to be collaborative with bottle cleaning for the liquid contact?
Okay, this sounds like a follow-up from the one before. It's really that's going to kind of depend, I think, on your supplier, and what you're filling it with. Like if you're kind of purging the bottles with sterile air and you're filling it with beer or something with alcohol, that can kind of mitigate that, probably. For standalone non-alcoholic, I think it really is going to depend on the supply of it and the facilities management, which is.
Thank you, Catherine. And that is all for our Live Q&A session for today. And again, excellent responses from both of you. As we're nearing the end of our scheduled time, we'll have to conclude our Q&A session. But please don't worry if your questions haven't been addressed yet, as our speakers and team will follow up with you. And you can find more information using the QR codes right in front of you for more resources and how to get in touch with the team. And that brings us to the end of our Q&A session and webinar. I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks to Catherine and Julia for their outstanding presentation, and to our sponsor, Donaldson, for making this session possible. To all our attendees, please keep an eye out on your email for instructions on accessing the on-demand version of this webinar. You can also find it on our website at pmi-live.com. Stay connected with us for more exciting webinars. Follow us on X at BA Webinars for daily updates, and follow our LinkedIn company page at Business Review Webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I wish you all a wonderful day ahead.